over to our wonderful guest teacher today, Jen Ellis.
Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. Welcome to my living room. Today, we're going to make a quilt together out of sweaters. And but before I begin, I wanted to sort of give you a little history of my, my history with sewing and also my history with making quilts out of repurposed materials. So, Maddie, if you can pull up the first picture, I've given Maddie a bunch of pictures to illustrate. So this was actually the first quilt that I ever made, and it was a t-shirt quilt. So this is back in the late 90s, and those are some of my brothers and sisters holding the quilt up. Now t-shirt quilts are pretty popular, and many of you may not have 5 or 6 sweaters, but if you don't have sweaters, another option for you is to make a quilt out of t-shirts. And so that was actually the first quilt that I ever made. And in the next picture, I have another quilt example that I've made, but in picture number 2. This is actually a picture of a quilt that was made by my grandmother's grandmother. So it was started back in the 1920s for my grandmother by her grandmother. And then my grandmother's grandmother died, and it was passed down through 5 generations of women in my family. And I found the quilt face in my mother's basement, and I went ahead and finished it and gave it to my grandmother for Christmas one year. And so it was very touching because it was started by her grandmother and finished by her granddaughter 80 years later. So another possible way that you can make quilts out of things that you already have is to find an old quilt that somebody has abandoned, or maybe that you abandoned a long time ago, and just give it new life. I actually have that quilt hanging up in my craft room because it's an heirloom. I can't imagine using it, and it was hand stitched. And so looking at the next quilt picture, picture number 3. So this is actually another quilt that I've made out of repurposed materials. This is a very precious quilt to me because the white parts in this quilt are actually my wedding dress. And the green, the dark green, is actually from my partner's wedding shirt. And the rest of the material came from my grandmother. When she died, my mother gathered up a trash bag of her old clothes, and I saved them. And she died in 2008, so I saved them for years and years, just thinking one day I'm going to have enough time to make a quilt that is special enough for someone who is special enough. And that time came during the pandemic when we were all stuck at home, and I have a little daughter. And if you go to the next picture. Actually, this next picture is my grandmother and me from 1997. But my grandmother is actually wearing a shirt that I cut up and put in that quilt. And so during the pandemic, I dug that big trash bag full of my grandmother's old clothes out of the basement, and I cut them all up. And in the process, if you look at the next picture, there's my little daughter wearing the same shirt that my grandmother had on the last picture. So I cut up that shirt and a bunch of other shirts, that scream 90s and 80s, but that were so special because they smelled like my grandmother still, which was amazing. After all these years, they were in a plastic bag in the basement, and they still smelled like her. It was so, especially you could smell it when you were ironing them. It just, the smell of her just came right back. It literally brought me to tears while I was making the quilt. And my daughter, I actually let her pick out the pattern of that quilt. So if you go to the next picture, this is one of our favorite books, The Quilt Maker's Gift. And it's about a quilt maker who only makes quilts to give away, and a greedy king who wants one of her quilts. And she won't give him one until he agrees to give away all of his possessions. And it's a beautiful story, but inside the book, if you go to the next picture, there's pictures of quilts. There's quilts on every page. It's a beautifully illustrated book. And so I let my daughter choose a quilt from this book. And then I made the quilt for her out of my wedding dress and my grandmother's clothes. And it was a design that she picked. And during the pandemic, since I had lots of time to poke around on the internet, I actually found in the next picture, you can see I actually found that the Quilt Maker's Gift has some other books that go along with it. There's the Quilt Maker's Journey and more quilts from the Quilt Maker. And now I have books of designs. But if you want to make a quilt, you know, one place to get started is just to think about the materials that you have at home that you no longer need, whether it's your wedding dress, whether it's somebody else's wedding dress, or, I mean, those make great quilts. They're very, very interesting. Or clothes from somebody who's passed. That can be a very good sentimental quilt. And t-shirts. I mean, what do you do with all those t-shirts? Making a quilt out of them is a great idea. And so if you go to the next picture, this is actually another quilt that I made, and I think this is the last one, but the center of this quilt, that green patch, was actually from a green corduroy blanket that my mother had, that her mother bought for her with green stamps. So probably some of you are old enough to remember when they would give you stamps at the grocery store and you could fill out a little green stamp card and go to the green stamp store and you could buy things like quilts, and you could also buy sewing machines. So a lot of people got sewing machines from the green stamp store. But I couldn't bear to part with that green blanket, so I cut it up and I used it as the centerpiece for a number of other quilts. And that quilt literally came off of a bed in my house, which is why it's so wrinkly. And then the next picture. So this is the quilt that we're going to make today. And this is my friend Mindy, and she contacted me last fall because her mother had passed away, and somewhere in their family, somebody owned a cashmere factory. And so her mother had all of these cashmere sweaters, just beautiful, soft cashmere sweaters. And what Mindy wanted me to do was turn them into lap quilts for her and for her siblings, and I think maybe for her dad. And so so I took the cashmere sweaters that she had, and I cut them up and figured out, you know, how big the quilts could be, and I made them for her and for her siblings for Christmas. And let's go to the next picture here. So then, I mean, most of you probably already know what happened to me next is after Christmas on the day of the inauguration, that picture of Bernie Sanders was taken. And the other thing that I know how to make, so I make quilts, obviously, but the other thing that I know how to make is mittens. And he wore a pair of mittens that I made for him to the inauguration. And then of course, they were turned into lots of memes. And you know, 20,000 people emailed me looking for the mittens, and I became like weirdly internet famous. And I look at that picture and I think, in the previous picture, I look so shell-shocked. Yeah, if you want to go back, I try to have a lot of sympathy for myself in that picture because that was just a few days after the inauguration and I was exhausted. I hadn't slept and I was just really, I didn't know what to do. You know, it was a complete surprise that this all happened. And then so if you go on to the next picture, you can see lots of people wrote articles about me in newspapers and magazines. That's at the University of Vermont, where I was a student. That was an article featured in their alumni magazine. And then the next couple of pictures actually just show the Bernie's mittens, I think, too. Maddie, if you want to go to the next one. So that's actually a picture of me with all of the mittens at a craft fair. But obviously last year there weren't any craft fairs. And after the inauguration, when everybody reached out to me looking for the mittens, I didn't have any. So I partnered with the Vermont Teddy Bear Company, and they're actually making the mittens using my pattern. And my only request from them was that they donate a portion of the proceeds to charity. And so they're not disclosing how much to the general public, but a generous portion of the sale of each mitten will go to the Make-A-Wish Foundation for now, and then later it'll probably become a different nonprofit, just to sort of spread that wealth out. So if you go to the next picture, you can see there I am at the factory with my connection there, Hayes. And then in the next picture, you can see that now that's inside their factory store. They're selling the mittens, and it's for a good cause, and it all worked out. So everybody who wants mittens can get them. I'm no longer making them to sell, but I do make them for charity, which is so joyful, and it's just, it has been a wonderful turn of events in my life. So when Michaels reached out to me to teach this class, initially they wanted me to teach how to make mittens, but I can't do that because I have an exclusive contract with the Vermont Teddy Bear Company, which led me to my other passion, and really my first passion, which was making quilts. And so that's my introduction. And we've come full circle. And if you want to look at the next picture, this is the quilt that we're going to make today, or one really similar to it. You probably remember the picture of my friend Mindy. This is one of the quilts that I made for either her or someone in her family, and it was made out of cashmere sweaters. And so I contacted Mindy and asked her if she could loan me the quilt back so that I could show everyone. And she actually said, you know what, I have found another bag, of cashmere sweaters. And I would really love it if you could make 2 more quilts for my children. And I was like, that's perfect, because Michaels, I'm doing this class for Michaels, and I was looking for sweaters to make a quilt. So now, if you look at the next picture, some of the prep for this class I really had to do in advance because I didn't want to be cutting, however many sweaters there are there. It took hours to cut up all those sweaters, but those are the sweaters that came from the bag. Literally, you can see a tag on the bottom, like one of them had never been worn. And some of them had been worn. Some of them had smelled a little bit of perfume. And I could tell that these were really sentimental sweaters. Not to me, but in the same way that my grandmother's clothing it smelled like my grandmother. While I've been working with these sweaters, I've noticed that these sweaters smell like someone in Mindy's family, like her mom or like her. And so it's beautiful and precious to her. And so I've tried to be really careful and using as much of the material from every sweater that I could. And so that brings me to I saved that red sweater that's up in the corner. I didn't cut that one up in advance. And so I thought we could start today by, I could show you how I process a sweater. So here's the sweater. And the first thing I do when I process a sweater is I cut off the arms. And, this was a cashmere sweater. So it was probably extremely expensive. And I think about that sometimes when I'm cutting up a sweater, particularly if it was hand knit. Somebody spent so much time making a sweater. And here I am just cutting it up, but I'm cutting it up to repurpose it. So now I'm going to cut off the neck because I can see that I could use that. And now what I'm left with is the body of the sweater. Okay. I'm going to use as much of this sweater as I possibly can. And so what I did was I made a quilt square that's 9 by 9. So after I'm done sewing this with a 1/2 inch seam all around, then it'll be an 8 by 8. But it's 9 by 9 now. And I literally used, well, this came from a waffles box, but usually I use a cereal box. And I know that's really rudimentary, but I wanted to specifically show people that you actually don't have to have perfect tools to be a good quilter. You can use what you have around. And so I've been using this 9 by 9 square to sort of like, map out where I'm going to cut. So I can see that I can't get too wide, but I could get 1 square here. Now I'm actually cutting through the front and the back of the sweater at the same time. That saves me some time. And I'll mention, about this, using this cardboard and cereal boxes in this way, I thought that this was such a clever and original idea. But when my grandmother died, so I've been doing this for years, I actually took her sewing kit from her house. And inside there were all these little cardboard squares because she had done the same thing, which just, delighted me. So here I have my 9x9 square, and I have a hard plastic ruler right here, and I'm going to line it right up. And I have a rotary cutter here. If you don't have a rotary cutter, these things are super helpful. And I'm just going to cut this square right out of this sweater so that I can see. And now the square is mostly done. Now I have a nice right angle on this corner, and I'm going to cut it so that it is 9 inches. And of course I've started here at the 4, so I'm going to go to 13. And I'm going to lay this plastic ruler all the way down and make a nice clean cut there. And I'll turn it this way and do the same thing here. I'm at 3 over here, so I'm at 12 right here. There is some math involved in quilting, which I like because I like math. And there you go. I have 2 9x9 quilt squares. I'm going to go ahead and actually I have a stack of quilt squares over here. I'm going to go ahead and look at another piece from this quilt. This, if you remember, is the cuff. It's sorry, not the cuff. It's the turtleneck neck. And I'm going to use a smaller square. So I knew when I was thinking about this quilt and cutting up sweaters that that in order to maximize the sweater, I would want to have some smaller squares too. So this is a 5x5, and I'm thinking if I cut it far enough down, I can get 2 here and then open this part up and get 1 more. And so I'm going to go ahead and try to do that. I'm going to cut this right off.
Hey, Jen, we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
So the first one we have is it okay to use sweaters of different materials, such as cotton or acrylic?
Yes. However, I have found with cotton sweaters that when you cut them up, they shed a lot and they sometimes come unraveled. The beauty of wool is, especially if you've sent it through the wash and sort of partially felted it, is it doesn't come unraveled. But if you had a cotton sweater that had sort of a tight knit, you could probably get away with doing that. I think probably also if you sprayed it with starch, you might be able to prevent it from unraveling while you're working on it. But I think that wool is a little easier to work with. There are a lot of sort of wool imitations, like Ramy, I think is one, and different kinds of polyester lookalikes. And you could probably make a quilt out of that. I recently made a pair of mittens out of like a felt material. It was kind of stretchy. Not felt, it was velvet. It was like a stretchy velvety material. And they came out great. I was so exclusively making quilts and mittens, particularly out of wool, that I really overlooked some of the other materials. So I guess the short answer is yes, you can use all kinds of materials. But I do think with like a loosely knit cotton, you might run into some trouble. Was there another question, Maddie?
Yes, there was. We did have someone make a comment that they always end up with a sore forearm when they're pressing too hard on the ruler. Do you have any good tips for keeping things from slipping on your mat?
I don't know. No, I don't. You know what? I have terrible arthritis in my thumb, and like I've paid some price for being a crafter with my tired muscles.
That's
I
quite
don't
all
have
right.
great tips, but that's like, you know, probably the thing that people don't necessarily recognize. So I also play the guitar, so I'm using my hands a lot, and yeah, you know, your muscles and your ligaments don't last forever.
If anyone has any tips for whoever asked that first question, please type them in chat. I see a few different tips and recommendations floating around in the chat, as well as questions coming in. So thank you for that, everyone.
Are you going to print out that chat? Because I would love people's tips on how to spare my hands.
Yeah,
you know,
everyone.
One thing that I do is I take a lot of breaks. You know, I try not to quilt for too long. When I like to think about crafting as like I get in the flow. And there's actually been a lot of research about the creative flow recently, especially, that when you're working on a project that's creative and you're really into it and you're thinking your thoughts, you're listening to your podcast, you're watching trashy TV, that's what I always do. It's a great way to relax your brain. And look at this, that other piece that I saved, I can get one more 5x5 square out of this. So that's pretty great. Also, one thing I really have grown to love is crafting with other people. I really can understand why, like, one of the main ways that women, you know, gathered and entertained themselves before TV and before all the, you know, modern entertainment things is people would get together and they would quilt, or they would sew, or they would craft together. And it's very joyful to do this with other people, because as you can see, as I'm talking to you and cutting, a lot of this, once you get the hang of it, is kind of mindless. Although you do want to somewhat focus, because if you don't, you could make a mistake, which is why I have a seam ripper right here all the time, because I'm constantly making mistakes. Anyway, so now I want to show you what I will do with the arm of the sweater. I'm going to turn it inside out and cut right along the seam here. And one thing I can't stress enough is how much a good pair of scissors makes a difference. So this is a scissor by Fiskars, and this one has a spring. It's got a spring here that springs back, and it's very, very sharp, and it easily cuts through, you know, cashmere, which is like slicing butter, but these scissors will also cut through really thick, you know, Aran wool sweaters. And so I appreciate a good pair of scissors, and it is worth the investment to get a good pair of scissors. You'll enjoy your quilting time a lot more if you have a good pair of scissors. So I'm going to cut up both arms at once. I'm going to lay them on top of each other and try and cut the squares at the same time, just to save myself some trouble. And this sweater is really neat because the cuffs have this neat stitch. I'm not exactly sure what that's called, but it's a different stitch than this, and it adds just some texture and depth to the quilt that looks nice. So I've laid both of these on top of each other, and, you know, I'm going to go back to my 9x9 square. And, you know, it's possible that the best way to do it that would maximize the most amount of material is to do it diagonal. Or it might be more, you know, going to try this one diagonal because it does look like that would maximize the material. A lot of quilting, actually, I take that back. A lot of quilting is just doing the same thing over and over again, which is, you know, why some people aren't successful at it, because they, you know, are easily bored. But it's also why some other people are incredibly successful at it, because if you're like me and you have a really stressful day job where you're always on the go, and I'm a second grade teacher, so my goodness, my days are so busy. And after I put my daughter to bed and cleaned up from dinner, and you know, sometimes I just want to make a cup of tea, watch The Bachelor. That's you know, one of my guilty pleasures.
We had a few people in chat let us know that that type of rib, or that type of knit on the cuff, is called a rib knit.
A rib knit, that's neat. You know, I was talking about this with Maddie before the class. I actually don't knit. A lot of people praised me after the inauguration. They're like, "You're such a great knitter." But I don't knit. I literally cut up sweaters that other people knit or that were machine knit, and you know, make stuff out of them. I have a lot of respect for knitters after, you know, deconstructing their work for so many years. So there's another couple of large squares. Anyway, I think that you get the idea of how I deconstruct a sweater. If I were not live on this class, I would continue to go through every single piece of this sweater. I would bring back the body of the sweater, and I would just try and make use of every inch of this sweater. And if I had some triangular pieces or any kind of piece that looked like they might be able to be sewed together to make another square, I might save some scraps. These actually are not big enough, but I had some from a different sweater that were big enough, and I sewed them together. And then you can just take your square and line it up to the seam and cut it so that it's just the right size. It never hurts to have a few extra squares laying around.
So Jen, before we move on to the next part, I have a burning question myself that a few other people have echoed in the chat. Okay. So do you not need to worry about the grain or the stretch of the material facing a different direction than the other pieces in the quilt?
When I sew them together, I try to deliberately sew them in a different direction like this. So that, you know, because they do stretch in different ways. And sometimes I think that's not quite your question. Yeah, I do understand what you're asking. And if you have like if I had cut that one diagonally, then the grain would have been diagonal. Is that what you meant?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I don't worry about that. I think it adds character. If you care about that, you could definitely be intentional about only cutting horizontally. But I think, you know, if there's one thing that you take away from this class, please let it be that it doesn't have to be perfect. And I love this quote, and I don't know who said it, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? Like you can make something and it will be totally imperfect, but it'll still be really good. And in every quilt that I've made, there are imperfections. There are places where the corners didn't meet up perfectly. And you forget. I mean, when I look at old quilts that I've made now, I don't sit there and think, oh, I remember I didn't match these corners, or this material didn't perfectly line up. It was diagonal. I never think about that, because the whole effect of a quilt is so stunning that sometimes if you find that things are imperfect, make everything imperfect, and then it will seem like you did it intentionally. Okay, so after I cut up all of the squares, then I kind of needed to do some planning and some math. And so Maddie, if you'll go to picture number 20. Okay, so in making this quilt, and this plan is going to be available to you after the class so that you can kind of see where my thinking was. But if you are making a quilt because you picked a design and you wanted to go to the fabric store or go to Michael's online and order all the fabrics, then you would have to figure out how much of each fabric you need. And that's one way to make a quilt. When you're using repurposed materials, you kind of have to do things in the opposite order. You need to process your material first and see what you get. And initially, I was hoping to get 2 twin size blankets out of the material that I got. I didn't quite have enough. What I ended up with was 87 9x9-inch squares, which when they're all sewed together, it actually becomes 8x8. And then I had 148 5x5 inch squares. And those little ones I put together in groups of 4 to make a block that is also 9x9. So when I was thinking about the material that I had to take that number 148 and divide it by 4, which gave me 37. So then I added 87 plus 37, and I had a total of 124 9x9-inch squares to work with. Now, my friend Mindy has 2 children, and she wanted an equal-sized quilt for each child. And so I made, so I did some math and I played around with the numbers, and the easiest way to do it was to make 8 squares by 7 squares. So a total of 56 squares for each quilt, which is smaller than a twin size bed, but it is a significant quilt. It's a big quilt, bigger than the ones that I had made for her around Christmas. So 56 and 56 is 112 total squares, which left me 12 squares at the end, which was perfect because I wanted to make a smaller quilt, like maybe a baby quilt or a baby doll blanket, to demonstrate, the rest of how to make this, because making a twin size quilt, that's a pretty big quilt, and it would have been a little unwieldy to make that in front of you. So what I'm mainly going to be working with from here on out is that little 12, that's 3x4 quilt. And that's the one that I'm going to finish in front of you. And if you go to the next picture, Maddie. So I wanted Mindy's quilts for her children to be different from each other, but she wanted them to be the same size and to be a mixture of all of the colors. And so what I did was I made the designs in the middle different from each other. And where you see there's a little pencil T inside the square, that's where I've put together a bunch of little squares to make a bigger square. And then so take a look at quilt number 2, that design. If you go to the next picture, Maddie, that's that quilt all laid out on my living room floor. And you can see how I put together all of the little squares to form bigger squares and made a design around. When I was designing that quilt, I tried to just mix up all the colors. And obviously there's no red in there because I have the red in front of me, and I'm going to add some red in because Mindy wanted all of the colors. Even though red and that coral don't exactly go together, The effect is kind of beautiful anyway. Like these are the colors that her grandmother wore, or sorry, that her mother wore. And her children will have all of these beautiful cashmere sweaters to wrap around them for years to come. So also you can see that's a really big quilt, and it's still on my living room floor because, you know, now I'm going to start sewing pieces of the quilt together. And so I think that that's the end of the pictures that I wanted to show people. And so now, you know, if you were making this at home, you would probably pause this video and process all of your own material. And there really isn't, I mean, there's so many different ways to do it. If you do it slightly differently than the way I do it, that's totally okay. There are lots of different ways to do it. You might have different tools. You might only have a pair of scissors and a block like this. And if that's what you have, that's okay. That's where I started. But over the years, I've accumulated more materials, including this light right here, which as I've gotten a little older is very helpful to see which side is the inside and the outside of the sweater. So now I'm going to pull up my sewing machine, and I have two sewing machines here today. I have my old sewing machine that my mother gave to me when I was, I think, 12. And that's the sewing machine that I sewed Bernie's mittens on and a lot of quilts. I have a backup sewing machine too, because after the inauguration, the Singer Sewing Machine Corporation noticed that my sewing machine is a little old, and they sent me a beautiful new one. And I love it. It's a great sewing machine. But I mean, this is the one that feels like an old love to me. It's so comfortable. And so I still use this old one a lot because I just love it. And if what you have is a very old sewing machine, that's great. If it works, use it. You can get a brand new sewing machine and you know, that will be great too. But you don't have to have brand new state-of-the-art equipment to make a beautiful thing. And so I'm going to use my old quilting machine, and you can see there's a little bumper sticker, Bernie, that I stuck on the inside just for fun. So the next thing is I want to take my stack of little squares. Here's a bunch of them. And I want to put them together to make the big squares. And one way that I do this to save time is to kind of make a long train. I like to think of it as a train. So I will put two pieces together, and you want to put the outside, like the part that would be outside, facing the outside so that the stitch is not seen. So I'm going to put these two together, and let me just tilt this down a bit so you can see it. So I'm going to, and now some people might pin these together. I don't. I do pin things together later, but I think pinning is tedious, and it's something that prevents me from wanting to do this project. So yes, it could be more perfect if I pinned it, but it's good if you don't pin it. And if it makes you more apt to do the project by not pinning it, it's okay to skip that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to stop. And I'm not going to cut this thread. I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to find two more. I'm going to put them in front of the light to make sure I've got the outside and not the inside. And I'll put these together. And like I said before, if I had, you know, I might try to put the horizontal with the vertical because they do stretch differently, just for a little bit of integrity. I'm just going to lift this and continue. And you just keep doing that, keep putting them together. I noticed while I was cutting this up that I had a lot more white and black material than the other colors. And so I was really intentional when I was making the first one about making sure that I used a lot of the white and black in each one, so that at the end I wouldn't end up with a whole bunch of white ones to sew together. You could probably plan this out a lot better. And I probably will plan it a little bit more once I get down, but as you remember from the plan, I have like 147 of these to sew together, or 148. So that's a lot. So I'm just going to start, and then when I get so that I have fewer, I'll make sure that there aren't just white ones left. So sewing like this.
Jen, we have a few questions as you've started sewing.
Okay.
The first one we have, I'm not sure if you'll touch on a bit later. Do you ever reinforce the squares? And if so, what do you use?
I have not reinforced the squares for the sweater quilts. But when I was making that t-shirt quilt, I bought this stuff that I ironed on, and I want to say it's called fuselage, but that might not be it. That might be a different word. But it was sort of like this almost meshy material, and you ironed it on, and it added a lot of texture. It added a lot of integrity to the t-shirts so that they didn't bend all over the place. And that t-shirt quilt I don't have anymore. I loved it to death, literally. And so I ended up throwing it away, 5 or so years ago, because t-shirts disintegrate over time, and it had been washed and used in a million ways. But that stuff that I ironed on made, initially they were really stiff and the quilt was a little uncomfortable, but after it went through the wash a bunch of times, it did soften up. I did the same thing with a couple of the shirts that were my grandmother's. They were just so thin, and I ironed on some stuff for that too. But if you have questions about those things, like any craft store will, like, people who work at craft stores are so helpful, and they're almost always crafters. And so you can always ask someone, like, what should I get to iron on to give this a little bit more integrity? For the sweater quilts, what I do at the end, and I'll show you this at the end. So this is the finished quilt. I put a little stitch at every corner to hold it together. And I did a little stitch with thread so that it wasn't totally visible. But if you like the look of a little pom-pom, you could do a stitch with yarn. You could make it obvious. But that's one of the things I did to hold it together.
We did have a couple others. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so people are asking what your seam allowance was one more time. And
okay, so I can see that I'm at, I think it's 3/8 of an inch is where I am. But when it goes through the foot of the sewing machine, it flattens it out, and it ends up being more like half an inch. But in the end, after I've put together a bunch of these little 4x4 squares, I'll show you how I go back and remeasure to make sure that they're the same size as the larger squares. So let me just send one more of these through. So, okay, I don't know if you can see that, but it's at the 3/8 mark, but it's pushing out beyond it as it goes through the foot. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out, and what I have is a train of little squares together. And I'm going to move this off the table for a second. So normally I would just do all of them in one really long train. It saves a lot of time, and then I would go through and just cut them like this. And you may find that some of the things I do are like not according to the textbook, or there are probably better ways to do them. I'm a self-taught sewer. And I think that it's important to mention that because I don't want anybody to feel like their lack of skill or expertise is a barrier to doing something like this. Sometimes you just need to jump in, be a problem solver, put it together, and see what you have. So I have a bunch of these little pieces that are sewn together, and I want to make a bigger square. And I have a few left over from earlier today. I don't want to use any two of the same sweater in one square, just for variety. So I'm going to put together, I also wouldn't use like one of these prints with one of these prints because the prints add so much texture to it. I want to spread them out. And so I'm going to put this one together with this one. And if you want to switch, Maddie, to the above camera. So this is what I have. And one thing I do try pretty hard for when I'm making my sweater quilts is I want to match up these two seams. So I face, you know, the good parts towards each other. And I pull them out a little bit and I match the seams. So I'm going to pull this right up. I've sort of pulled this up and matched the seams. And once I have that really right next to each other, I'm going to take a pin, just like a regular pin, and I'm going to stick it right in that seam. Now, if you sew over it, it might hide the pin. You want to make sure you take out that pin and all other pins, because I had definitely been known to like find pins in quilts later. And I see that there's like this little extra tuft here. I'm just going to cut that off. Now, for this one, I'm also going to add a couple of stabilizer pins on the side because I don't want the quilt to bunch up right there at the corner. So I'll put a couple of stabilizers in with that. And now what I would do is go through every single one of these and pair them all up so that, you know, I can make adjustments before I sew everything together to make sure that I don't have, you know, any one square with all white or all black or all of gray or whatever the color you have the most of is. I really want it to be random. You may have a more specific plan for your quilt, like maybe you want, you know, maybe you want everyone to be the same color, like, you know, whatever your plan is, that's, you know, that's where this all comes in. You know, keep going back to your plan and stick with it. So now I've put a couple of these together and I would stack them up. And in the end, I would have a big stack of all of these that are going to be 4. And I pull my sewing machine back up. Bring it back on. And I'm just going to sew it together. That was a good question about the seam allowance. On this sewing machine, it's not marked. I know that that line is the 3/8 line, but
we also had a question of what particular stitch you're using in the length.
That is a very good question too, just a straight stitch. And actually I can see that there's something wrong with my winding because I'm just going to show you this because this is like what sewers go through, right? I actually, can you see how that messed up? It was because I didn't realize that where I thread my, like the way I thread my thread had come undone. So the tension was wrong. And, you know, this is something that my new sewing machine barely ever does, but my old sewing machine does do. And so, you know, what I would do is just rip this out and try again. And I've now fixed the part of the tension. I hadn't realized that it had come undone. So I'm going to try again. And this sewing machine was actually giving me some trouble earlier today too. So try again. And I see that it's better. So I did really want to show people how I make a quilt using this sewing machine because it is old, and I think a lot of people use old machines. So here I have my two pieces that are stitched together. I know I put 3 pins in. I want to make sure I take 3 pins out, especially if you're making a baby quilt. That'd be a really bad gift. Stick them back in my little pin strawberry. I specifically got this because my mother used to have one and I used to think it was so cool. So I got it for nostalgia. Now I'm going to open this up and see how close my seams were. And if you want to look down, you can see that they are very close. They're not absolutely perfect, but from the distance of like, you know, 2 feet, my phone is actually perched on a music stand here. You really can't tell that it's not absolutely perfect. So that's a quilt square there, and I want the quilt square to be 9 by 9. You can see that it is pretty close. It's a little long on this side, so I might just take, but actually, you know what? When I was using this, I have shaved off tiny increments of this to the point where I want to make sure I measure on my mat instead. So that actually is close enough. I'm not gonna bother to cut any more off. I might cut this uneven edge off. But do you see right here the way that this sewed out? This piece, this ribbed piece, stretched out more than this piece, and I'm just not going to worry about that. I'm just going to cut the corner off. And when I'm working with this later, if I find that this comes unraveled, I'll just sew it down again. So there it is. You'll end up with a lot of these, and here are some others that I made earlier today. Many. When I was laying out the quilts on the floor that looked like this, I was pulling from this pile and making sure that I didn't have any particular colors go together. Like I didn't want to put white with white. I wanted to sort of, you know, turn them around so there's variety. And so now I'm going to make a larger quilt square. So from the quilt that I have laid out on the floor, the way that I would just do it is I would turn one piece over on top of another piece like this. And I would stack it up. And then I would turn another piece on top of one of these. And stack it up. And I'm keeping in mind that I always want to sew this part because I'm folding it over from the quilt on the floor. Maddie, do you want me to do a demonstration of that on the floor, or do you think that that was clear?
Well, let's leave it to the chat. What would you like to see? You were talking about moving out into the living room and showing everyone on the floor?
Yeah. You want to see my living room?
I think everyone would like a sneak peek of your house.
Okay. Maddie, is that affirmative? You want me to move to show people?
Yep. Everyone bear with us as the camera's going to move a little bit.
Okay. So there's my living room. And
here's the quilt on the floor. And so when I am sewing, I have everything laid out here, and I just fold this over like this over like this. I go right down the line. And then I stack them like this. And I'm keeping my hand on the piece that I want to sew together. And I want to remember that this is the part I'm sewing together. So I might just do that while I get myself ready. Now, right back to where I was before.
Okay. And now this part where you're assembling the quilt and sewing pieces together, there's a lot of back and forth. So I've got my quilt, my sewing machine back, and I'm going to sew together. Oops, making sure I pull from this side. Just start sewing them together. And if I don't get them back in the exact right order, in this case, it's really okay because they're supposed to be in a random order. So the order that I had them in was just spreading the colors out. If you have a very specific order, you'll be a lot more back and forth trying to make sure that you don't mess it up. But I'm just gonna go ahead and sew this together.
I'm just going to take a moment to let everyone know that this class is being recorded and it will be available to watch on YouTube tomorrow and on our Michael's website the day after. So if you have to go, that's okay. You can always catch the recording there.
So what I'm going to do is put a couple of these together and then show you how I put four of the bigger blocks together. My sewing machine my thread came out. All right, now I'm ready. I'm going to try that again. I've used this sewing machine for so long that I can actually hear when something isn't right with the stitch. So I've put these two together. I'm going to do one more. Oh my goodness, I'm having so much trouble with this sewing machine today. We give it one more chance. And then I'll switch over to the other one.
It must be camera shy, nervous on Zoom.
You know, this is an old machine and it is finicky, and I do have a newer machine that I could use, but honestly, the newer one is computerized and I just don't feel as confident using it yet. Although I'm very, very grateful to the Singer Sewing Machine Corporation for sending me a new machine when they realized that I was using this old one. I'm sure that crafters out there know that, like, you have an old machine, you're used to it, it's not perfect, but sometimes you just want to use it anyway. I used to craft with this woman who, like, literally laughed at me when she saw my machine. That's okay. So, okay, so now I have two of these blocks done. And I'm going to put them together. I normally wouldn't put them together right away. I would normally sew all of them first, but for the purposes of this class, I want to put these together. I also probably wouldn't put blue and blue together like that, but the first block that I made had some weird stitching on it, and I don't want to use that one. So I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. So I want these two seams to match up, and I want these two seams to match up. So when I put them together, I'm going to go through that same process of looking at the seams and I actually can see how the end of this seam has come undone a little bit. So I'm going to fix that real quick. And this is just a really good example of what it's like to be a quilter. Like you see something that's wrong, it'd be quicker to just move on. But it's better to fix little problems like that before they become big problems. Like a hole in your quilt. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and match the seams here, like I did before. Now don't get bored because I'm going to show you something that I like to do. It's a little trick next. So if you're like, oh, I'm sick of watching this, I'm going to show you something, which is why I'm doing this. So I have the two seams done. I'm going to put my supporting pins in here and then here. Here, just to put this together. There comes a time in your quilt when you are going to be putting large pieces together. And one thing that I do specifically with this kind of material, because it is stretchy and I don't want it to bunch up, is I will start sewing in the middle of a long piece and sew to the end. Then I'll turn it over and start at the middle again and sew to the end. I wouldn't necessarily do that with just these together, but I'm going to demonstrate that because it's just a technique that I've learned over the years to prevent them from bunching up at the needles. Although you'll find that wool and sweater material is very forgiving and you can kind of stretch it as you go. Oh shoot, I was going to demonstrate starting in the middle. Let me do that. Okay, so now I'm going to start in the middle and sew out to the end. And then I'll come back and start in the middle again. And I want them to end at the same place. So if it looks like one is a lot shorter than the other, I might stretch the other one so that they end together. Those kind of naturally did end at the same spot. But when you're quilting, you end up sewing together, like I said, large pieces, and it can be a little tricky to get them to line up. So now I'm going to go back to the middle and sew in the other direction, picking up where I left off, where I started. And if you're really new at sewing, I think most people know this, but I didn't. And I also didn't believe it, but you can just sew right over these little needles. I can't remember who told me that, maybe my mother. And I was like, really? It's not going to break your sewing machine? And it won't. You can just sew right over them, which is super handy. Probably most of you already knew that. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up and see how my seams matched up. And you can see they matched up pretty close here. And, you know, there are some little bumps and some little imperfections, but, you know, it's a sweater quilt. It isn't going to be absolutely perfect. But it's so soft and the effect is just so lovely. So if you are watching a recording of this and you want to pause and get yourself kind of caught up to what I just did, this would probably be a good stopping point, because now I'm going to jump ahead and assume that everybody has, you know, put their quilt face together. And the way that you do that is you just keep following your plan. You know, I've sewed together these 4 right here. And they're right here, kind of turned around. And then I would, you know, sew 4 more together and 4 more, and then 4 would become 8. And then, you know, you're putting 8 and 8 together, and pretty soon you have a whole quilt face. Kind of like that quilt face that I found in my mother's basement that was my started by my grandmother's mother, right? It's just the top of the quilt. And now I'm going to show you how to put the quilt together. So bear with me for a moment. All right. This is the 12 square quilt that I put together earlier today. And I'll hold it up so that you can see it on the computer. There it is. And what I've done is I have pinned it to a thin layer of batting. And I wanted to batting is just like the filling that you put into a quilt. And I bought this really sturdy batting that is meant for larger quilt squares. And it's really meant for quilts that you don't plan on sewing an intricate, you know, pattern on top of. And I cut it down so that it's approximately the size, but I wanted to show you the batting and the quilt face put together. And what I've done is I've taken pins and I pinned them together in lots and lots of places. And actually a better thing to use here would have been safety pins that close, but I didn't have any on hand. So I just used regular pins. And I'm going to cut the batting right down to the same size as the quilts, or at least close. There are so many different ways of finishing a quilt. I'm going to show you one way, and you know, there's so many different ways to do it. This is just the way that I have done this one, and this is when I was making those quilts for my friend Mindy. This is what I did, and the end product is nice, so I'm going to do that again for this class. But there are lots of different ways to do this. And there are a lot of people on YouTube and Pinterest who have like examples of how to do this. How to finish a quilt, how to bind a quilt, all that stuff. That's really one thing that has changed in my, you know, my time as a quilter. So I'm 43 and I've been quilting since my like late teens. So over 20 years. And, you know, in that time, the internet became a thing. And all of a sudden, people have a lot of access to information. You just have to choose the information that you think is doable or accurate. Sometimes people put crazy things out there. So when I'm done cutting around this little baby quilt, I will have my quilt face securely attached to my batting. Now, the batting is different from the backing. The backing is what you're actually going to have, you know, against your skin when you're cuddled up on the couch with this nice quilt. This batting just helps, you know, conceal the seams so that when you're, you know, wrapped in this quilt, you don't feel all of the seams all the way through. And it also gives the quilt some stability and some warmth. So what I want to add now is the backing, and I chose a flannel, just a white flannel. And I ordered it from Michael's online because I wanted to see, you know, they've asked me to do this class, and I actually had never ordered from Michael's before. I didn't know that they sold fabric or quilting material. And the Michael's where I live in Vermont doesn't have fabric. So if I was going to order from Michael's, if I was going to get material from Michael's, I would have to order it online. And it was actually really easy. And so this is how the backing came. One thing that was like, it didn't give me the option to have everything put in one box to save on packaging materials. That's one thing that I kind of wish that they'd done, because that everything came in lots of different boxes, which was, you know, what wouldn't have been my preferred method. But this is how the backing came. And it's flannel. It's a really big piece because I'm going to be making those 2 twin quilts out of it. So I'm going to open it up. And I intentionally left this in here just so that you could see, like, when you order from Michael's, this is how it arrives. It's very clean, securely packaged, nicely folded. This is many yards, and obviously I don't need all of this for right now. I just need one corner. So I'm going to find the edge. And I deliberately ordered more than I need in case I mess up. If I mess up with some frequency. So
Jen, I
Yes.
wanted to give you a little heads up that we have about 15 minutes left of airtime.
That's perfect. Oh, I can't seem to find the end. All right. So what I'm going to do now, and I can see that one side is considerably softer than the other. I'm going to put the soft side on top of the quilt face, and I'm going to sew them together. But I'll leave a little bit on the end. I'll leave a little opening because I'm going to turn it inside out. So I am going to speed up a little bit because I want to make sure that I can show you the rest of this. Normally I would do this on the floor and have it all laid out flat. Just to make sure there weren't any wrinkles. But in the interest of time, I'm going to do it right here on the table. And now I have my 3 layers put together. I have the backing. Inside I have the quilt face, which is facing the outside of the backing. And I'm going to bring this back up. This time I want to sew a larger seam. I'm going to sew, I think it's 1 1/4. But you know, you would want to kind of eyeball it on your own machine. I'm going to do a nice big seam. Now, I also probably, if I wasn't a little short on time, I would probably pin this all together. But I want to make sure that you can see what I do next. So I'm going to go ahead and sew all the way around. And here's the trick. When you get to the corner, you want to make a little bit of a rounded edge. And sometimes I take a plastic plate or a paper plate and I actually draw a nice rounded edge. Because when you turn it inside out, if you have a sharp corner, it's really hard to get a clean corner there. But a rounded corner, you can do. So I'm coming down to the first end, and I'm going to kind of make a nice little rounded corner. I learned that trick from Pinterest. Now I can't get so carried away that I can't forget that I want to leave a little bit of an opening because I'm going to turn it inside out. If I was making a twin quilt, this would be a lot. It would take a lot longer. I'm going to make another rounded edge. Now again, if I wanted it to be absolutely perfect, that rounded edge, I would use a plate and just trace it in advance. I'm coming to my third corner, rounding that edge, keeping track of where I started. Okay, I'm actually going to stop right there because I can see. Why do I always do that? I kind of sewed a little too far. I'm going to rip it back a little so I can have enough space to turn it inside out. A seam ripper is a sewing person's best friend. I use them all of the time. I sewed too far on this, which is what I was trying not to do. And I think that that's like when you're trying to hurry a little bit, that's when you start making mistakes. That's okay, because I can easily fix it.
Did you leave that opening in a particular spot on the blanket?
You know, I meant to leave it kind of in the middle, but I actually mistakenly left it on the corner. But normally I would leave it in the middle of one of the sides because I would do an invisible stitch to hide it, and it's harder to do that on the corner, but it's a little nerve-wracking to do this in front of people. So now I'm just going to turn it inside out. And I have to be a little careful because I have pins that are kind of open and I don't want to prick myself. And I actually can see how it, let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to put it inside out, and there is my nice rounded corner. Easily turns inside out. You have a nice, even seam. It's very clean. It's all the way out. There, oops, there's my blanket. And now, you know, one thing that I want to do is go back and pull all the pins out. And so if you just bend them through, they come right through the sweater. You can't really do that with all material, but sweaters, you can just push the pins right through. So I would now go through and make sure I removed every pin because it makes it a lot easier to work with it if it's not full of pins. And after I removed every pin, I then would want to do an invisible stitch, just a hand stitch. That's often how I finish them. And I would stitch this shut. Oops. Pin it first, just to make sure that it's right where I want it to be. And like I said before, I made a mistake and did this right on the edge. It would have been a lot easier if I had left the opening right in the middle, but I didn't. So now I'm going to sort of fix that by hand. Okay. Now you're probably wondering how to do an invisible stitch. And again, I self-taught myself how to do this. But basically, you would want to, I have a pre-threaded needle here, which I just pulled out. So I have a little quilter's needle and some thread. Now, this thread is black, and I did that on purpose so that you could see it, but normally I would do a white thread so that it blends in with the backing better. Just gonna pull that through. And then I'm just going to start, like, I would start here on the edge and just very carefully snag little bits. Just going in and out and in and out. And every so often I like to come up for air. So there's my pin. And I'm going to pull it through all the way to the end. And I'm actually going to leave a little bit on the end here because I'm going to do my invisible stitch all the way down to where I stopped. And then I'm going to turn around and do my invisible stitch all the way back and tie it off with a knot here at the end. It's a little hard to see whether you've, like, how secure your stitch is, since it's on the inside and you're just sort of snagging the material back and forth with your quilting needle. But, which is why I go back over it. So I'm pulling this through. So there it is. There's the stitch right there. And like I said, I would go all the way down and then all the way back and tie it off. But I'm not going to demonstrate all of that because we are running low on time. So I'm going to switch to looking at this blanket right here. This was one of the ones that I made for my friend Mindy. And after I did the invisible stitch, which I have no idea where it is on this one because it's invisible. And so I don't even know where it was. But I did take this edge and I did sew about an inch around just to give a little extra stability to the edge here. And you could use a quilter's foot for that, but I actually just used the foot that was on my machine. And so I have this nice clean line around the edge of the quilt, which I obviously haven't done on the quilt that I have in front of me, but I normally would do that. And the reason I'm not going to do that is because I want to show you this cool stitch right here that I used. my friend Mindy actually found this online and she was like, can you make this stitch? And I was like, yes, if you can find it online, you can usually find someone to teach you how to do it online, which is what I did. So I have some blue thread here and I'm just going to show you how to make that stitch because it's really neat and it's very, you know, fancy looking. So this is some blue string and I actually got this, not string, sorry, yarn. I got this yarn and a bunch of other yarns at Goodwill. You can often find great things at Goodwill or estate sales. And you can buy them at Michael's, but part of the purpose of this is to talk about reusing materials and using materials that you found. So here's what I did. Imagine that there is a stitch all the way along here that's 1 inch in from the seam. You put your needle through, and I just have like, I think this is called a darning needle maybe. It's a needle that's big enough to put yarn through. I'm gonna put my yarn right through, pull it almost to the end, but not entirely. And then I'm going to loop it around where it was before. So I've looped it around. I'm going to kind of leave this end hanging. Actually, to make the most of this, I should pull it a little bit more. There we go. But I don't want to pull it all the way through. So there's the first one. Now I'm going to go 1 inch over and I'm going to eyeball it. Because again, it doesn't have to be perfect. And if you try to measure every single one, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. I'm not going to pull it all the way through. I'm going to hold it with my finger and loop the needle through. And now I'm going to pull that like that. And the string just the yarn just comes right along the seam here. And it makes such a cool pattern. There are all kinds of different stitches you can do like this. And you don't even have to do this at the end of your quilt. It just makes it look kind of neat at the end and finished. And I had never done this until Mindy asked me to, because she had found a picture on Pinterest. And at this point, I would probably move over to the couch, make a cup of tea, watch some reality TV or something. And I'd go all the way around the whole quilt until it was all done. And then, like I said before, I would take some thread and just stitch through a little stitch through every corner, just to hold the quilt together better. And I think that brings me to the end of the quilt. And I wanted to make sure there was a few minutes at the end to answer questions. And so,
well, we're actually at our maximum time. We don't really have questions for, we don't have time for questions, but if people have questions for you, where can they reach you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at VTAwesomeness. Okay, I made that before anybody knew who I was. And let's see, you can also find me on my website at generositybringsjoy.com. And at my website, there's a way to contact me and you can ask me questions. You can also just email me at jenellisvermont@gmail.com and I'll probably email you back. You can email me on Facebook. I'm here. I'm not like so busy in the summer that I couldn't answer your questions if you had them. So I'm sorry that we ran out of time, but if you have further follow-up questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. And remember, everyone, you can watch this recording tomorrow on YouTube. All right, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.